Well, welcome to Mystic and the Nerd. It is a recording this time, not a Zoom live, and we are doing it this way because I'm in Townsville, and Trish and I are in Townsville, and we are hanging out with the Shalom family, which is the church that we're partnering with. That's predominantly working with the Indigenous youth up here in Townsville. It's an extraordinary work, and I know that from this week, I'm going to have a whole bunch more revelation of thoughts and of understandings that I'm going to be really eager to share with our community when I get back into it. But for this week, we are recording, and here we are. So here's Jess. How you going, Jess?
I'm doing so good. And you know what? We've been trying to pin down a conversation for this wonderful time together. And I decided we should just hit that record button because I have a very, very abstract thought forming. And what better place to do it than to just vocalize it, throw it out there and see where it goes. You know, I think Jade calls it throwing spaghetti at the wall. Is that a saying? Have you heard that?
I think it's actually a practice. Trish would
Yeah.
be a part of that, and when I'd see spaghetti stuck to the wall, it's just like, how did that get there?
Well, that might actually work
Well,
for this thought that I'm about to throw
we'll
out.
go throw some spaghetti at the wall, Jess. Let's see where we go.
Let's see. Okay, well, we've been deep diving into John. We've been in John for a long time here this year. We've been working through chapters 13, 14, 15, and this week, 16. And a lot of the heart around some of these really big concepts and teachings in John are looking at the words and looking at the deep meaning. And I've been sitting around really not just going to the root word, not just looking at the ancient language, but really sitting in that place of what is the big picture of this word in action? What is the experience of this word, the yada? And that just adds a whole different layer and context to some of these conversations we've been having. So as I've been saying in this place, this is my new thought for me. I've not even shared this with you, Matt. We did the Genera course. So we were looking through the entire Bible and each book trying to look at it through a lens of love. And so much of that is what we're doing as we're looking at these really hard concepts and teachings and theologies and words. So when we look at words like obedience or commandment or command, sin, all these different things, we're trying to look at it through these lenses of love. But I had this thought, and maybe this isn't even an aha moment for you, but I started thinking, I wonder if it's possible because God is love and because everything God would speak to us in this relationship would be through that vein, through that lens of love. I wonder if we could boil down every philosophical meaning, every heartbeat, everything down to funnel it down to its most purest meaning. And if it would still come back to love with all the teachings and words that Jesus spoke. So can I take the word obey and can I strip it back to love? Can I take everything that was spoken through his words, through his breath and life? Can I bring it back to love? And today we were looking at righteousness. We were looking at some other big words like that. So that's kind of where my mind was wandering. And because I've read just kind of neurologically how we're wired to perceive everything through love or fear. And if God's speaking it, it has to come from a place of love. That's my theory.
Yes.
Yes? All right. There we go. Stop record. What do you think about that?
I think a lot about that. I think the whole idea of renewing your mind, as in what Paul would speak about. What am I being renewed from? What have I learned? How have I practiced that? Now, what have I discovered? And how do I practice that? So, which I think is one of the reasons why at times too the church can be so conflicted, is because we've learnt one way, but our preaching is completely a different way. We preach love, but we've learnt law, or we've learnt how to fear. We don't want to be punished. We don't want to do the wrong thing. We don't want to make the wrong choice with God. We don't want to go against his eternal will and plan. Why? Because we think that if we do, we won't be either living our best life or we will be punished. That whole thought for me is fear driven, that I must get it right. And I know someone pretty cool has written a book on that.
Good book.
But this is the essence of the whole conversation. So when we read Jesus' writings, if we've grown in the place of law, then we will read his words in law.
Mm-hmm.
We will look for law in them. And when we discover law, we think we will have discovered something divine inside of it, because the things that we've learned are aligning with the things that we believe Jesus is saying. To do that, we have to go away from the character of God, though, which is the point for me, that if he is love, then what does that mean? That's the adventure I'm on.
Mm-hmm.
Of not just believing that love is the ooey gooey feeling of warmth that you get when you feel that you're in love, um, but to know how big the word love is and to discover how big it is. And that's where, for me, it's a different way of thinking. And this is where the mystic for me becomes very real, because I have to imagine a conversation from a different voice than the one that I might have grown up listening to. And because I've grown up listening to that voice, I can be very used to the way it was. And so any of these new thoughts can be seen to be at times fragile, because I'm in that place of going, is this actually true? Can I actually believe this? Can I actually live my life inside of this thought that then becomes the way that I behave and the way that I act? Now, I've been doing that for a few years, and it's interesting because people see me differently these days than they would have been back then. And they talk about the love that I carry, they talk about the Father's heart that I carry. And so for me, there's evidence that the thoughts that I've had from years ago now have traction in the place that the way that I see God, the lens has changed. The way that I use my imagination in prayer, it's far different. Instead of fighting, I'm now loving. Instead of waging war with the principalities, I'm actually just standing firm, as Paul would say in Ephesians 6, knowing how protected I am by God, knowing that every curse is broken, like what Colossians would tell you. These are the ways of looking and listening differently to it for me that have changed inherently the way I interact with God. So, yes.
Yes. Full circle. Oh, I have a lot of different thoughts. Which one do I want to grab? I think because we just came out of the Bible study today and we spoke a lot about this word righteousness. You mentioned some of the leadership sessions you've just had and really centering on the same teaching in John, but looking at the word being led. And you and I were having these conversations of how differently the lens of our own experience can impact that. Like you've just shared the way that maybe we used to interpret those meanings versus the people we are today looking at it, and how much those meanings have changed in our own lives and experiences. I was looking really quickly at how many times Paul uses the word righteousness. So we were just talking about how much understanding the language somebody uses really helps us identify who they are, what they're all about, what their life experience is. You can take that word righteousness, parallel it, or put it on top of what we know of Paul's journey into finding Christ. And it's extraordinary, honestly, if you think about his life and journey in that place and why righteousness would be such big theme for him. I look at righteousness as rightness. I always looked at it as getting upright or being able in that equity to share with God. You are walking upright alongside or with him. And then I think it was chapter 16, we were looking at Jesus is saying we have that righteousness because he goes to the Father. So I picture him standing upright with the Father, and we get to come alongside that. But if I look at this conversation and think of if you could take the whole meta narrative, I love that word, or the overarching words that God speaks to his people, it all comes back to this love. It all comes back to this big meaning of love. It is not a word in that wiggly feeling of goodness. If you read the Bible, there's a lot of wrestling. There's a lot of overcoming. There's a lot of mercy and forgiveness and grace for what people have looked like in relationship with God since the beginning. But I bet if we looked at that idea of love throughout and how many definitions of love we find, you couldn't even count it. So I guess I'm just proving more to my point that I think the philosophy, the understanding, the theme of love is still what we can always bring God and his heart towards us. And it is a far cry from law. Because even if you look at law in the commandments, everything about that was to set God's people apart for his heart, for his relationship, covenantal promise. I could keep going, but I digress. What do you think?
What does it even mean that you digress?
It sounded appropriate.
Without further ado, like, what does that mean?
I will pass it along. I'm going to stop now.
The other phrase is per se. I don't even know how to explain that.
Per se. Yeah, per se. Per se.
But I have digressed.
They're fancy words.
I think everyone loves listening to the way that you do digress. That's been testified to time and time again inside of this brilliant community. Every time you do, revelation happens. I agree with you entirely. Like the Old Testament, even the Ten Commandments, I know it says do not, and that's what people get so hung up on. But the overarching statement of the law is to live in a way that we love God and we love others, as Jesus would say. And so these are the moments where you can look back and into a culture that we didn't live within and we don't really understand.
Mm-hmm.
But how does that then work in the culture that we're in today? In the culture we're in today, it's love starved, not love filled. And so in a love starved culture, fear fills in all those little voids. What if something happens? What is the worst case scenario? Our anxiety levels go through the roof because we don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And we lose the place of presence where I think love thrives the most. And so for a culture that we're in today, even if we could rewrite the 10 commandments over them, what would that look like and what would that be? And all of a sudden you'll find yourself in places of a different language that God might be speaking into our world today. But again, it comes through the lens that you hear him. And so, Jess, you and I have chatted around the concept of the fear of the Lord before and how problematic that phrase is to so many of us, myself included, when you have a concept of a God of love that you have to fear. There is nothing functional about that in my brain. Like it's just, that is the optimum of a oxymoron. And inside of that, I want to unpack that idea of why the fear of the Lord was such a big deal to the people it was spoken to, and how do we understand that? And you did an awesome job of that in unpacking it. And so it's things like that, that the lens that we use will be the lens that we hear God through. It's like listening to somebody and thinking you know what they're saying.
Yeah.
If you've completely assumed that moment, you will not be listening for what they're actually saying. You'll be listening for what you want to hear. And so with God, if we could allow our imagination, our mind, our spirit to engage with a conversation, maybe we're not assuming nor expecting, we might find way more than we can hope, dream, think, or imagine. Do you like how I did that?
Mhm.
Was that digressing
Uh, no,
per se?
per se. Not per se. Hmm. Well, I have another thought forming with this because of just my own, this will get a little mystical. My own prayer time this morning. Let's maybe talk about what it's like to get a word from the Lord, which is supposed to be love, right? If God is love and he's speaking a word, how can fear creep into that word so quickly when it seems like something God is speaking because he wants us to know, like going back again to John 16. He spoke things out so that their faith, they wouldn't abandon their faith. He
Mm,
wanted them to know these things. So if God speaks something, because he clearly he wants you to know it, maybe it's not because he doesn't want you to abandon your faith, but the principle of why God would want us to hold to a word is because of something good, I would imagine, from coming from that. But I was sitting in that revelation today of going, oh, but I don't actually think the word didn't bring me comfort. It didn't bring me joy.
yeah.
It challenged places because it actually revealed fear or doubt or things that I'm like, ugh, I don't know if I want to receive that. So there's just a very good application to probably coming back to the lens that we're looking at. And it's really hard to take that lens off when life or experiences are very real or reality don't allow
Yeah.
us to receive a word in love.
100% agree with you. This is where, for me, Jess, and I don't know how it works for you, but creativity is such a window into hearing the voice of God for me. I, I'll never shut up about this now of what I've discovered of listening to God, Father, Holy Spirit, Jesus through the creative process. There is something so infinitely powerful about it. I remember Bono in an interview with Eugene Peterson said that God always spoke through the creatives in the Bible. Why have we gone away from that? Why has knowledge become such a big deal and fear becomes such a real thing inside of churches? What does it look like for the creative in all of us, not just the ones who can do great artworks or write good books or anything like that? We're all creative. It's what the Creator God is doing in and through you, which is changing the world that you're actually in. And that is a wonderful conversation to be able to engage with, especially when people go, I don't know what that is at all. I don't see that happening in my life. Well, let's just chat around that. Let's just see what God might be doing. So, in this place of creativity, yeah, I can honestly say that the lens that I have in listening to the Father's voice, I've become acutely aware to it. He entertains my questions. He wants to meet with me. And it's beautiful. Like it's just beautiful. So there's lots of thoughts around how to hear God. And creativity allows you to partner with God as creator. And the whole thing is you're doing things that you've not done before. That's the whole thing with creativity. Yeah, it's
Mm.
beautiful, Jess.
I'm getting ready to teach a new Emmanuel prayer course coming up. And a lot of that is to really look at what blocks us from receiving.
Mm.
So as I'm hearing you talk about creativity, that is such a great place for you to sit to be able to receive. Because when we're being creative, that is us being able to really be present with ourselves and live in the fullness of our identity in design. We've had great conversations around creativity and how different that looks
Mm.
for people. And actually, the word for like craftsmen or creative in the Old Testament, we've talked about this before, is actually the same as wisdom. So going back really quick, squirrel thought, if the beginning of the fear of the Lord, or it was at the beginning of wisdom is the fear of the Lord. I mean, the word for wisdom is synonymous with the creatives. Just saying. But this this idea of, I guess, kind of where I landed was bringing that to the Lord too, and noticing that there's always things that are present that tend to block us. And fear is such a big one for so many of us. I always talk about fear. I feel like everything comes back to that for me. Such a big part of my story. Where was I going to go with that? I can't remember. I got lost in my squirrel thought because I thought that was really interesting. Going back to the Old
It
Testament.
is.
It'll come back. We can talk about that. Let's segue there until my thought comes back.
Well, even to think of that one thought of wisdom and creativity being interlocked, and you can't have one without the other. We say, God, give me wisdom. That's Solomon's great prayer. It's been my great prayer for many years of leadership. Give me wisdom. And he gives you creativity. And you go, what? Like, cool. But I want wisdom. And like, God's like, yeah, that's exactly what you asked for. If you want my wisdom, learn to be creative with me. And again, creativity flows from somewhere. And for each of us inside of that, it can flow from our story. It can flow from our collaboration with Jesus and allowing that then to become something of wisdom. And so when people say, Matt, I really like what you've said, often it's me sitting at a campfire in my imagination with the designer going, this is really bugging me. I can't understand what this what this is. Can you help me? And then creativity gives me that place of engaging with what that is. So I
Mhm.
love that whole thought, and it's not fear driven. Don't get this wrong, Matt.
Yes.
Like that's not even a thought in my head. My thought is, can I actually write this in a way that's actually going to be helpful? But the thought inside of it is this is something of creativity that's flowing in front of me. And I don't know if you feel the same even when you're painting. Like you might think I'm going to paint a line, and you're just like, wow, how am I actually going to do that? And is this going to be something that's going to be really cool? And will it end up in the junk, in the trash, as you would say?
Mhm. Does happen.
Yes, I've had a chat with Trevor about that.
Get it out of the trash bin. Hmm. Yeah, I guess I'm just going back to that first thought of just the challenge we face so often in reading the Bible with some of these old things that are attached to certain words that bring our mind right into that place of fear. And noticing today that even an encouragement word or a promise evoked a certain level of fear in me today. I was trying to think of it, if I could anchor into a new idea of knowing, if I can know that everything God breathes and speaks is good, then even something that might feel a little unsettling to receive. And for some people, and from in my story, even being able to receive the fullness of God's like adoration for me, his love for me, like the words of encouragement towards me were hard to fully connect into and to receive. So yeah, I think it's a really fascinating place, but a really common place for so many of us to wrestle out this notion of fear and love.
Yep. Yep. And the only place I've found to do that, safe community. Like I know we can do it one on one with him. I know that. But doing it in community brings accountability and authenticity into a bigger conversation too. Because I can get so lost in my own thoughts that like I could convince myself if I wanted to. But putting it into community allows other wisdom, other creativity to become part of the bigger thought. So even when you think about righteousness, like you've got a take on it, I've got a take on it. Everybody who sat in the room with us in the Bible study had a different concept or take on it. But collectively, we have this very rich definition
Mhm.
of what a very religious word is. Because, like, it's again, the word righteousness is like sanctification. Like, what does that even mean? But we use those words as if everybody knows what they mean. And in a church setting, they can be the words that go, that can that just I disengage with, because it's just like you're talking something that I have no application for. So how about we stop for a moment and let's just dig a little deeper on this baby and see where this takes us. And who knows? We
Mhm.
come to a greater level of revelation through the creativity, and inside of that, a wisdom gets added into a community, and it becomes safer for all of us.
Mhm. I think that actually partners well with the idea of the very real challenges of what love is and community and what
Mm.
safety is. Um, and if we could apply the same thought bubble, I don't know how fully formed it is or if it's trackable. I hope so. But if in community and in people we are truly walking with in this journey, if even in our misunderstandings and in those places that feel unsettled or hurt, can we still boil down to that same foundational truth of love? That in the end, we can look at motives, we can look at everything that comes up and what it looks like to actually journey alongside with people. What
Mm.
if what's that other way of starting with that lens with
Yeah.
love and understanding each other? That's a hard
Yeah.
thing to do.
It's hard, I guess, but it becomes easy when you feel safer.
Hmm.
And I think that's like even when you're in Bible college or seminary, sometimes that can be the least safe places in the world because you don't want to ask a question because you fear that somebody's going to come down on you like a sledgehammer. That's where safe places, like, they can be rare, but when you find them, it's like it's a treasure trove inside of that place. I've been able to be seen and be present, all that sort of stuff.
I've been looking at that idea or concept around Hesed again
Mm.
as this what modern psychology would call attachment. But this idea that Hesed or love that we share with each other is that connecting piece that says, I am connected to you
Mm.
and I'm not going to leave. And we can be there in the highs and lows and all the hard things too and have those conversations. But I think that's where the birthplace of safety comes from, knowing that we can show up and be truly authentic
Mm.
and be real. And that safety comes because people won't leave. They'll stay and they'll weather the storm alongside you, with you. I don't know how we landed in this place today, but tying in all the thought bubbles for the last few weeks, really.
Yeah, beautiful.
We can end on a Hesed. I'm good with that.
I'm good with that too. Well, thank you all for hanging out with us with the mystic and the nerd. Next time we'll be back in live in the present, maybe even with some stories of Townsville. Who knows?
Ooh, yeah, hope so. All right, bye, friends. Hope you enjoyed it.
Bye for now.